The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training facility as Sarah Martinez stepped out of the transport vehicle. At 22 years old, she looked even younger than her age, with her petite frame and quiet demeanor that made her seem almost fragile among the towering figures of seasoned soldiers around her. The other recruits barely glanced her way as they gathered their gear, their conversations filled with boasts about their previous shooting experience and military backgrounds. Sarah had arrived at Camp Pendleton 3 days earlier, part of an elite sniper training program that only accepted the most promising candidates from across the country. What made her presence unusual wasn't just her age or size, but the complete lack of any formal military background. While her fellow trainees were battle-hardened veterans or top graduates from military academies, Sarah came from a small farming town in Montana where the closest thing to combat training was hunting deer with her grandfather. The training facility buzzed with activity as Sergeant Major Williams, a grizzled veteran with 30 years of service, addressed the group of 12 candidates. His weathered face showed the kind of intensity that came from years of real combat experience, and his voice carried the authority of someone who had seen both the best and worst that warfare could offer. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to what will either be the most challenging 8 weeks of your life or your last week in this program, he announced, his eyes scanning each face in the group. Sniper training isn't about being the toughest or the strongest. It's about precision, patience, and the mental fortitude to make a shot that could save dozens of lives or end a conflict before it escalates. When his gaze landed on Sarah, she noticed the slight pause, the almost imperceptible raising of an eyebrow that suggested he was questioning whether she belonged there. She had grown accustomed to such reactions throughout her life. Growing up as the smallest kid in her class, the daughter of a single mother who worked 3 jobs to keep their small farm running, Sarah had learned early that people often underestimated her. The first week of training focused on basic marksmanship and weapon familiarization. The other candidates quickly established a pecking order, with Marcus Rodriguez leading the pack. A former Army Ranger with multiple deployments, Marcus had the kind of swagger that came from proven battlefield experience. He was tall, muscular, and carried himself with the confidence of someone who had never failed at anything military-related. "I don't know why they're letting civilians into this program," Marcus muttered to his friend Jake during their first shooting exercise, loud enough for Sarah to hear. "This isn't summer camp. People's lives depend on what we learn here." Sarah said nothing, focusing instead on the rifle in her hands. It was different from the old hunting rifle her grandfather had taught her to use, heavier and more complex, but something about holding it felt natural. She had spent countless hours as a child learning to shoot, not for sport, but out of necessity. Living on a remote farm meant protecting livestock from predators and putting food on the table when money was tight. The first shooting test was at 300 meters, considered an easy distance for anyone hoping to become a military sniper. As the candidates lined up at their positions, Sarah could hear the whispered bets being placed on who would score highest. Marcus was the overwhelming favorite, followed by Jake and 2 other veterans who had impressive credentials. When it was Sarah's turn, she approached the firing line with the same quiet concentration she had learned from her grandfather. "Breathing is everything," he used to tell her. "The rifle is just an extension of your body. Don't fight it, work with it." She settled into position, adjusting her grip and finding her natural point of aim. The target seemed small and distant, but she had shot at similar distances while hunting in the Montana wilderness. The difference was that back home, she was shooting at animals that could move and hide, making this stationary paper target seem almost too easy. Her first shot hit dead center. The second did the same. By the time she had finished her 10-round string, every shot was clustered in the center ring with precision that made even the instructors take notice. The range fell silent as the target was examined, and when the scores were announced, Sarah had achieved a perfect score. Marcus's confident expression faltered slightly as he heard the results. He had shot well, certainly better than average, but his group was spread out across the target in a way that would have been acceptable, but not exceptional. Several other candidates had struggled with the distance, their shots scattered across the target face. "Beginner's luck," someone whispered, but Sergeant Major Williams wasn't convinced. He had been training snipers for over 15 years and had learned to recognize natural talent when he saw it. There was something about the way Sarah handled her weapon, the calmness she displayed under pressure, that suggested this was far from luck. Over the following days, the training intensified. The candidates learned about ballistics, wind reading, range estimation, and the complex mathematics involved in long-range shooting. While others struggled with the calculations and theory, Sarah absorbed the information like a sponge. The concepts her grandfather had taught her through practical experience now had scientific backing, and understanding the why behind what she had always done instinctively made her even more effective. The physical demands of the program began to take their toll on some candidates. Long hours of lying motionless in uncomfortable positions, carrying heavy equipment across difficult terrain, and maintaining focus during extended observation exercises pushed several to their limits. Sarah's small stature, which had initially seemed like a disadvantage, actually worked in her favor. She required less food and water, could fit into smaller hiding spots, and her light weight made her nearly silent when moving through brush. By the end of the second week, 3 candidates had dropped out, unable to handle the physical and mental pressure. Those who remained began to notice that Sarah wasn't just keeping up with the program. She was excelling in ways that defied their expectations. The breakthrough moment came during a stalking exercise designed to test the candidate's ability to move undetected through enemy territory. The task was to approach within 200 meters of an observation post manned by experienced instructors equipped with high-powered optics. Most candidates were spotted and eliminated within the first hour, their movements too obvious or their camouflage inadequate. Sarah approached the exercise differently than the others. Instead of trying to move quickly and directly toward the target, she studied the terrain for nearly an hour before moving. She had learned patience during those long hunting trips with her grandfather, sometimes waiting motionless for hours for the perfect shot at an elk or deer. When she finally began moving, it was with a deliberation and understanding of natural movement patterns that came from years of observing wildlife. She didn't fight against the environment, but became part of it, moving when the wind stirred the grass, timing her progress with the natural sounds of the forest. For hours later, when the exercise was called to an end, the instructors were puzzled. They had spotted and eliminated every candidate except one. Sarah had not only reached the 200-meter mark undetected, but had actually positioned herself less than 100 meters from their position, close enough that she could have taken a clear shot at any of them. When she finally revealed herself, standing up from what had appeared to be an empty patch of brush, the instructors were genuinely shocked. Even knowing approximately where she should be, they had been unable to spot her. That evening, the atmosphere in the barracks was different. The casual dismissal and barely hidden mockery that had characterized the other candidates' attitude towards Sarah began to shift into something approaching respect. Marcus still maintained his position as the group's informal leader, but his comments about her became less frequent and more grudging in their acknowledgement of her abilities. Sarah noticed the change, but didn't let it affect her focus. She had learned long ago that proving herself was an ongoing process, not a one-time event. Each day brought new challenges, and she approached them with the same methodical determination that had gotten her this far. The third week introduced the candidates to advanced shooting positions and environmental factors. They learned to shoot from awkward positions, compensate for extreme weather conditions, and make accurate shots while dealing with physical stress and fatigue. These lessons pushed everyone to their limits, but Sarah's background proved advantageous once again. Growing up on a farm had taught her to work in all kinds of weather, to maintain focus while exhausted, and to make critical decisions under pressure. When other candidates struggled with shooting accurately after hours of physical exertion, Sarah's smaller size and efficient movement patterns meant she was less fatigued to begin with. The instructors began to take special note of her performance, not just because of her accuracy, but because of her consistency. While other candidates might have excellent days followed by poor ones, Sarah's performance remained steady regardless of conditions or circumstances. By the end of the third week, it was becoming clear that this quiet young woman from Montana was not just surviving the program, but potentially emerging as one of its top performers. The question that began to form in everyone's mind, including the instructors, was just how good she might actually be when pushed to her absolute limits. The stage was being set for a test that would challenge everything the candidates had learned and reveal the true extent of their abilities. What none of them knew was that Sarah's most remarkable demonstration was still to come, one that would leave even the most experienced instructors questioning everything they thought they knew about natural talent and the limits of human precision. The fourth week of training marked a turning point in the program's intensity. Sergeant Major Williams announced that the remaining 9 candidates would begin advanced long-range shooting, starting at distances that would challenge even experienced marksmen. The training facility's longest range stretched out to 1,200 meters, a distance where factors like wind, humidity, temperature, and even the curvature of the earth began to significantly affect bullet trajectory. Sarah stood at the firing line early that morning, studying the range through her scope. At 1,200 meters, the target appeared as little more than a small, even through high-powered optics. The wind was variable, shifting between 8 and 12 miles per hour from different directions, creating a complex puzzle that would require constant adjustment and careful observation. Marcus approached his firing position with his usual confidence, but Sarah noticed a tension in his movements that hadn't been there during shorter-range exercises. The other candidates showed similar signs of stress, understanding that this was where natural ability would be separated from mere technical knowledge. The first round of shooting was disappointing for most of the candidates. Even Marcus, with all his combat experience, struggled to keep his shots on target. The wind kept changing, and the mathematical calculations that had seemed straightforward at shorter distances became overwhelmingly complex when multiplied by the extreme range. Sarah's approach was different from the others. While they focused intently on their calculations and tried to force precision through willpower, she spent long minutes simply observing. She watched the grass at various points down the range, noting how the wind affected different areas. She observed the mirage rising from the heated ground, understanding how thermal currents would push her bullet off course. Her grandfather had taught her to read wind by watching nature's own indicators. "The wind talks to you if you know how to listen," he used to say. "Trees, grass, even the way dust moves tells you what the air is doing." When she finally took her first shot, it struck within 2 inches of the center. Her second shot was even closer. By the end of the exercise, while other candidates were celebrating shots that merely hit the target anywhere, Sarah had achieved a grouping that would have been impressive at half the distance. The instructors exchanged glances as they examined her target. Captain Morrison, a former Marine sniper with over a dozen confirmed kills in Afghanistan, shook his head in disbelief. "In 20 years of shooting, I've seen maybe 3 people who could shoot like that at this distance on their first try," he muttered to his colleague. Word of Sarah's performance began to spread beyond the immediate training cadre. By the 5th week, several senior officers had found reasons to observe the training sessions, curious about the young woman who was rewriting their expectations about sniper candidates. The psychological pressure began to mount, not just from the increased attention, but from the growing realization among her fellow candidates that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Jake, who had been supportive of Sarah from the beginning, found himself torn between admiration and frustration at his own limitations. "I've been shooting competitively since I was 12, he confided to another candidate during evening cleanup. "I thought I was good, maybe even great. But watching her shoot makes me feel like I'm still learning how to hold a rifle." Sarah remained focused on her training, but she couldn't ignore the changing dynamics around her. The easy camaraderie that had developed among some of the candidates was being strained by the competitive nature of the program and the growing awareness that not everyone would make it to graduation. The 6th week introduced the most challenging aspect of sniper training, shooting under combat conditions. The candidates were required to make accurate shots while dealing with simulated enemy fire, time pressure, and the stress of knowing that their performance was being evaluated for real-world application. During one exercise, candidates were required to move to a shooting position under simulated artillery fire, set up their shot, and engage a target at 800 meters while instructors used blank ammunition to create the sound and pressure of nearby explosions. Most candidates struggled to maintain their composure, their shots going wide as they flinched from the simulated combat environment. Sarah's performance during this exercise revealed another dimension of her abilities. Not only was she unaffected by the simulated combat stress, but she seemed to thrive under pressure. Her shots were more accurate than they had been during calm range exercises, as if the added stress actually helped her focus. Later, when asked about her performance, Sarah struggled to explain it. "It reminds me of hunting during storms back home," she said. "When everything is chaotic around you, you have to find that quiet place inside where nothing else matters except the shot." Captain Morrison was beginning to understand that Sarah's abilities went beyond simple marksmanship. She possessed an intuitive understanding of shooting that couldn't be taught, combined with a mental toughness that had been forged by years of real-world challenges rather than military exercises. As the 7th week began, only 7 candidates remained in the program. The physical and mental demands had eliminated 2 more, including one veteran who had seemed like a sure bet to graduate. The survivors were the cream of an already elite group. But, even among them, Sarah stood out. The penultimate week focused on mission planning and intelligence gathering. Candidates learned to work with spotters, coordinate with ground forces, and make the kind of complex decisions that real snipers faced in combat situations. Sarah's quiet nature, which had initially made her seem antisocial, proved to be an asset in these exercises. She listened more than she spoke, absorbing information and thinking through problems with a thoroughness that impressed her instructors. During a particularly complex scenario involving multiple targets and civilian considerations, Sarah demonstrated decision-making abilities that surprised even the most experienced instructors. When presented with a situation where she had to choose between a high-value target and protecting civilians, she found a solution that accomplished both objectives through careful positioning and timing. Most snipers develop that kind of tactical thinking after years in the field, Sergeant Major Williams observed. She's thinking like a veteran with the shooting skills of a master marksman. As the final week approached, anticipation built among both the candidates and the instructor staff. The culminating exercise would test everything the candidates had learned, but rumors suggested it would involve shooting at distances and under conditions that would challenge the absolute limits of their abilities. Sarah felt the pressure building, not just from the upcoming test, but from the weight of expectations that had been placed on her shoulders. She had become the focal point of attention in a way that made her uncomfortable, but she also understood that this was her opportunity to prove that her success hadn't been a fluke. The night before the final exercise, she lay awake thinking about the journey that had brought her to this point. From her grandfather's farm in Montana to this elite training facility, she had traveled further than just physical distance. She had discovered abilities within herself that she hadn't known existed and had earned the respect of people whose approval meant something in the world she was trying to enter. But she also understood that everything she had accomplished so far was just preparation for what was coming. The final test would determine not just whether she graduated from the program, but whether she would be accepted as a legitimate member of an elite community that had initially doubted she belonged. The other candidates were dealing with their own pressure as they prepared for the final challenge. Marcus had seen his position as the group's leader gradually eroded by Sarah's consistent performance, and he was determined to prove himself in the final exercise. Jake had pushed himself to his limits trying to match Sarah's abilities, and several others were fighting just to maintain their position in the program. The instructors spent the evening making final preparations for an exercise that would test the candidates in ways they hadn't experienced before. They had designed something that would push everyone to their absolute limits and reveal the true extent of their capabilities. As dawn broke on the final week, the candidates gathered for what they knew would be the most challenging test of their abilities. None of them, including Sarah, had any idea that they were about to witness a demonstration of marksmanship that would become legendary within the military community and change their understanding of what was humanly possible with a rifle. The final week dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of atmospheric conditions that serious marksmen dream about. Minimal wind, stable temperature, and excellent visibility stretched across the vast training range. The 7 remaining candidates assembled before sunrise, their equipment carefully inspected, and their nerves taut with anticipation. Sergeant Major Williams stood before them with an expression that revealed nothing about what lay ahead. Behind him, several senior officers had gathered, including Colonel Harrison, the base commander, and Major Chun, a legendary sniper instructor whose reputation extended throughout the military community. The presence of such high-ranking officials made it clear that this final exercise was more than just a graduation requirement. Today, You'll face the ultimate test of everything you've learned, Williams announced. This exercise will determine not just who graduates, but who among you has the potential to operate at the highest levels of military precision shooting. He gestured toward the range, which had been modified extensively over the past week. Additional targets had been placed at various distances, some partially concealed, others positioned to simulate real-world combat scenarios. But, most significantly, a new target had been established at the range's absolute maximum distance. The final challenge involves a shot at 1,600 meters, Williams continued, his words causing a visible reaction among the candidates. This distance pushes beyond normal operational parameters and into the realm of extreme long-range shooting. It's a distance where environmental factors become critical, where equipment limitations become apparent, and where mental pressure can destroy even the most skilled marksman. Sarah felt her heart rate increase as she processed this information. 1,600 meters was nearly a mile, a distance where a bullet would take several seconds to reach its target, and where factors like air density, humidity, and even the rotation of the Earth would affect its trajectory. She had never attempted a shot at anything approaching this distance. Marcus stepped forward slightly, his competitive instincts overriding his apprehension. "Sir, what are the success criteria for this distance?" "The target is a standard military silhouette," Williams replied. "Any hit within the scoring rings will be considered successful. But understand that at this distance, even the most experienced snipers have hit rates below 50% under ideal conditions." The morning began with a series of preparatory exercises at shorter ranges, designed to allow the candidates to adjust their equipment and confirm their zero settings. Sarah worked methodically through each distance, her shots consistently clustering in the center of each target. Her performance remained steady, but she could sense the building tension among the other candidates as they prepared for the ultimate challenge. By mid-morning, the preliminary exercises were complete, and attention turned to the 1,600-meter target. Through high-powered spotting scopes, it appeared as little more than a tiny speck against the distant hillside. The mathematical calculations required for such a shot were daunting, involving precise measurements of wind speed at multiple points along the bullet's flight path, compensation for air density changes with altitude, and adjustments for the minor but measurable effect of the Earth's rotation. The candidates would shoot in order of their overall program ranking, meaning Sarah would go last. She watched as each of her fellow candidates approached the firing line, knowing that their performance would help her understand the conditions and challenges she would face. The first candidate, a Navy SEAL with extensive combat experience, took nearly 20 minutes to prepare his shot. His calculations were meticulous, his equipment setup precise, but when he finally fired, the shot impacted several feet low and to the left of the target. The bullet's impact raised a small cloud of dust on the hillside, visible through the spotting scopes, but clearly missing the target area. The second candidate fared slightly better, his shot impacting within a few feet of the target, but still outside the scoring area. By the fourth candidate, it was becoming clear that even these highly trained individuals were struggling with the extreme distance and complex environmental factors. Marcus approached the firing line with determination etched on his face. He had spent extra time studying the ballistic tables and had made careful observations of wind conditions throughout the morning. His preparation was thorough and professional, reflecting his military training and competitive drive. When he fired, his shot came closer than any of the previous attempts, impacting just outside the target's edge. It was a respectable performance that demonstrated skill and preparation, but it wasn't a hit. He stood slowly, disappointment evident in his posture despite the acknowledgement from instructors that his shot had been technically sound. Jake's attempt was similar, close enough to demonstrate competence, but not accurate enough to achieve success. By the time Sarah stepped to the firing line, none of the 6 previous candidates had managed to hit the target, and the pressure of expectations weighed heavily on everyone present. Sarah approached the challenge differently than the others had. While they had focused primarily on mathematical calculations and equipment adjustments, she spent considerable time simply observing. She studied the mirage patterns rising from the heated ground, watched the movement of grass and vegetation at various points down the range, and even observed the flight patterns of birds that might indicate wind patterns at different altitudes. Her grandfather had taught her that successful hunting required understanding the environment as a complete system, not just calculating individual factors. Everything is connected, he used to say. The wind here affects the wind there. The temperature changes how the air moves. You have to see the whole picture. As she settled into her shooting position, Sarah felt an unusual sense of calm descend over her. The pressure of being watched by senior officers, the weight of expectations from her performance throughout the program, and even the competitive dynamics with her fellow candidates seemed to fade into the background. Her focus narrowed to the fundamental elements of the shot, the target, the rifle, and the environmental factors that would influence the bullet's flight. She made her calculations carefully, but didn't rely on them exclusively. Years of shooting in Montana's variable conditions had taught her to trust her instincts as much as her mathematics. The numbers provided a starting point, but the final adjustments came from an intuitive understanding of how bullets behaved in flight. Her breathing settled into a deep, steady rhythm as she found her natural point of aim. Through her scope, the distant target appeared impossibly small, but she had learned to focus not on the target's size, but on the precision of her sight alignment and trigger control. The range fell silent as everyone watched through spotting scopes and binoculars. Even the instructors, who had maintained professional detachment throughout the exercise, leaned forward with anticipation. At 1,600 meters, even seeing the bullet's impact would require careful observation through high-powered optics. Sarah's finger found the trigger's breaking point and applied steady pressure. The rifle's recoil surprised her slightly, as it always did with a proper trigger pull, and she maintained her sight picture to observe the impact. For several long seconds, nothing happened. The bullet was still in flight, covering the distance to the target at roughly 2,800 feet per second, but still requiring significant time to complete its journey. The silence on the range was complete except for the distant sound of wind moving through the grass. Then, through the spotting scopes, observers saw the unmistakable dust cloud that indicated impact. But, this time, the dust cloud was directly behind the target, indicating a hit rather than a miss. For a moment, nobody spoke, as if they couldn't quite believe what they had observed. Captain Morrison was the first to break the silence. "Hit," he announced, his voice carrying a note of disbelief despite his professional composure. "Dead center hit at 1,600 meters. The impact of this announcement was immediate and profound. The other candidates, who had been focused on their own disappointment at missing the target, suddenly realized they had witnessed something extraordinary. The instructors, who had expected that none of the candidates would successfully engage the target, found themselves reassessing everything they thought they knew about the limits of human marksmanship ability. Colonel Harrison, who had observed thousands of military exercises throughout his career, stepped forward to examine the target through his own optics. What he saw confirmed what Captain Morrison had announced: a clean hit in the center ring of the target, achieved under conditions that would challenge Olympic-level marksmen. Sarah remained in position for several moments, processing what had just happened. She had felt confident about the shot, but the extreme distance had introduced so many variables that success was far from guaranteed. The realization that she had not only hit the target but achieved a center hit was overwhelming. As she finally stood and cleared her rifle, the atmosphere on the range was unlike anything the instructors had experienced in decades of training elite marksmen. They had just witnessed a demonstration of shooting ability that transcended normal human performance and entered the realm of the truly exceptional. But even as the immediate shock of the successful shot began to settle, everyone present understood that they had witnessed something that would be discussed and analyzed for years to come. The quiet young woman from Montana had not just graduated from the program. She had redefined what they thought was possible. The silence that followed Sarah's impossible shot stretched for nearly a full minute before Colonel Harrison broke it with a single word that would echo through military sniper communities for years to come: extraordinary. The word carried weight coming from a man who had commanded special operations units in 3 different conflicts and had personally witnessed some of the most remarkable feats of marksmanship in modern military history. He had seen elite snipers make incredible shots under combat conditions, had reviewed records of legendary marksmen whose names were whispered with reverence in special forces circles, but he had never seen anything quite like what had just occurred. Captain Morrison was already moving toward the distant target with a range vehicle, determined to confirm what they had observed through optical instruments. The journey to 1,600 meters took several minutes, during which the candidates and instructors remained in stunned silence, each processing the implications of what they had witnessed in their own way. When Morrison's voice crackled over the radio, confirming a clean hit through the center of the target, the reality of Sarah's achievement finally began to sink in. This wasn't a lucky shot or a fortunate combination of circumstances. This was a demonstration of shooting ability that occurred perhaps once in a generation, if that often. Sarah herself remained the calmest person on the range, her quiet demeanor unchanged despite having just accomplished something that would have made international news in civilian shooting competitions. She methodically cleaned her rifle and organized her equipment with the same attention to detail she had shown throughout the program, seemingly unaware that she had just redefined the standards by which military marksmanship would be measured. Marcus approached her with an expression that mixed admiration, disbelief, and something approaching awe. Throughout the program, he had maintained his position as the unofficial leader of the candidates through his combination of experience, confidence, and genuine ability. But what he had just witnessed had humbled him in a way that years of combat experience hadn't prepared him for. "Sarah," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology. When you first arrived, I thought you didn't belong here. I was wrong about that, and I was wrong about a lot of other things." Jake joined them, shaking his head with a mixture of amazement and respect. "I've been trying to figure out how you do what you do for 7 weeks now. After watching that shot, I'm starting to think it's not something that can be learned or copied. That was something else entirely." The other candidates gathered around Sarah, their earlier competitiveness replaced by genuine respect and curiosity. They wanted to understand what they had witnessed, to learn from someone who had just demonstrated abilities that transcended normal human limitations. But it was the reaction of the instructor staff that truly revealed the significance of Sarah's achievement. Sergeant Major Williams, who had maintained strict professional standards throughout the program, found himself genuinely emotional as he addressed the group. "In 30 years of training snipers, I've seen remarkable shooters, natural athletes, and dedicated professionals who push themselves beyond normal human limits," he said, his voice carrying an unusual note of reverence. "But what we just witnessed goes beyond training, beyond experience, and beyond anything I thought was humanly possible under these conditions." The immediate aftermath of the shot created a flurry of activity as word spread throughout the base and beyond. Within hours, requests for information were coming from senior military leaders who had heard rumors of an extraordinary shooting demonstration. Video footage of the shot, captured by multiple cameras for training analysis, was being reviewed by ballistics experts who struggled to explain how the achievement was possible. The physics of the shot were staggering when analyzed in detail. At 1,600 meters, Sarah's bullet had traveled for nearly 2 seconds, during which time the Earth had rotated beneath it. Wind conditions had shifted its trajectory multiple times, and gravitational effects had pulled it significantly below its initial path. Compensating for all these factors required not just mathematical precision, but an intuitive understanding of ballistics that typically took decades of experience to develop. Dr. Rebecca Foster, a ballistics expert from the Army Research Laboratory, arrived the following day to interview Sarah and analyze the conditions of her shot. What she discovered challenged conventional understanding of how extreme long-range shooting was possible. The mathematical calculations for a shot of this distance are complex enough that most people require computer assistance to achieve reasonable accuracy, Dr. Foster explained to the assembled instructors. But Sarah appears to have made intuitive adjustments that went beyond the standard ballistic models. She compensated for factors that many experienced snipers don't even consider. When Dr. Foster interviewed Sarah about her thought process during the shot, she received answers that revealed a level of environmental awareness that bordered on the supernatural. Sarah described sensing wind patterns that weren't visible through conventional observation methods, adjusting for temperature gradients she had detected through subtle visual cues, and making trigger timing decisions based on atmospheric conditions that required instruments to measure accurately. "It's like she has a direct connection to the environment that the rest of us need technology to achieve," Dr. Foster noted in her report. Her ability to read and compensate for environmental factors appears to be operating at a level that exceeds our current understanding of human sensory capabilities. The graduation ceremony for the sniper program took place a week later, but it had been transformed by Sarah's achievement from a routine military exercise into something approaching a historic event. Senior officers who normally wouldn't attend such ceremonies made special arrangements to be present, and several legendary military marksmen emerged from retirement to witness the graduation of someone who had exceeded their own accomplishments. When Sarah's name was called to receive her graduation certificate and sniper qualification badge, the applause was unlike anything typically heard at military ceremonies. It wasn't just recognition of achievement, but acknowledgement that everyone present had witnessed something truly special. Colonel Harrison addressed Sarah directly during his remarks, speaking words that would be quoted in military circles for decades afterward. Throughout military history, there have been individuals whose abilities transcended normal human limitations and redefined what we thought was possible. Today, we graduate such an individual whose demonstration of marksmanship ability will be studied and admired long after we're all gone. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from her fellow candidates. Marcus, who had struggled with his own limitations throughout the program, spoke for all of them when he said, "We came here thinking we were pretty good shooters. We're leaving knowing we were privileged to train alongside someone whose abilities belong in the history books." The immediate practical impact of Sarah's achievement was significant. Multiple elite military units requested her assignment, recognizing that her abilities could provide crucial advantages in combat situations. The FBI's hostage rescue team, the Navy SEALs, and Army Special Forces all submitted formal requests for her services before she had even completed her initial military training. But the broader impact extended far beyond immediate military applications. Sarah's shot at 1,600 meters became a benchmark against which future achievements would be measured, and her techniques began to be studied and incorporated into advanced sniper training programs around the world. More importantly, her story became an inspiration for anyone who had ever been underestimated or dismissed because of their appearance, background, or unconventional path to excellence. The quiet young woman from Montana had proven that extraordinary ability could emerge from the most unexpected places, and that natural talent, combined with dedication and the right opportunities, could achieve what seemed impossible. Years later, when military historians wrote about the evolution of sniper training and capability, Sarah Martinez's shot on that clear morning would be remembered as a defining moment. It wasn't just a remarkable demonstration of marksmanship. It was proof that human potential, when properly nurtured and given the opportunity to flourish, could exceed even the most optimistic expectations. The young woman who had arrived at Camp Pendleton as an unknown quantity had departed as a legend, leaving behind a legacy that would inspire and challenge future generations of marksmen to push beyond what they thought was possible. Her achievement stood as a reminder that extraordinary ability could emerge from anywhere and that the quiet, unassuming individual might possess capabilities that would astonish the world. Sarah Martinez had proven that sometimes, just sometimes, reality could exceed even the most ambitious dreams, and that a single shot could change everything.